Welcome to Romance Studies 202, Literature and Culture from Modernism to the Present. And today it is a great pleasure to have with me Fernanda Negrete, who is Associate Professor of French in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures at the University of Buffalo. She's also Director of the Center for the Study of Psychoanalysis and Culture, and author, amongst other things, the book The Aesthetic Clinic, Feminine Sublimation in Contemporary Writing, Psychoanalysis, and Art. Fernanda, if I may, thank you very much for sparing your time and expertise. We're here to talk about this book, Marguerite Duras, The Lover, L'Amant in the original French. And my first question to you is, how would you suggest approaching this book?
Okay, thank you very much for having me, first of all. I'm really always very excited to talk about Duras. It doesn't end. I've been reading Duras for decades now. I think I must have begun with The Lover and when I was a college student and I'm still thinking about it, working on her production, not necessarily on The Lover. Like I'm just finishing a semester where I was teaching with a colleague a graduate seminar on mysticism, and I couldn't do it without bringing Duras into the conversation. So I would have had them read the novel The Ravishing of Lalvestein, which is one of
Hmm.
my favorite novels of hers. But because we had so much material and we were working across Spanish and French, and even beyond Spanish and French, I tried to be a minimalist and I showed one of her short experimental films. It's called Les Mains Négatives, the negative hands. And yeah, so she's just as wonderful and always talking about love um, and eroticism in everything that she does. So anyway, so how would I approach The Lover, which is probably the last thing that I have worked hard on writing about with Duras? It is a novel that comes in after a long period of not writing novels. That's something I always like to say in order to or to have people think about, because she's a multimedia artist in a way, or a multimedia, like a writer not only in one genre and not only in one medium. So she had spent a decade making films, and then she had just come back into writing more or like longer works, and this is like her first important novel of the 80s, I would say.
Mhm.
But this is someone who had written wonderful things since the 40s, and her 1950 novel, The Wall in English, I think it's called Un barrage contre le Pacifique in French, is a version of the Lover, which comes out in 1984. So it's a novel that formally has a lot of characteristics of a postmodern period. And if you compare it to The Wall is more of a modernist uh, novel. You can see like the Wall has very long sentences, beautiful sentences. It's very carefully crafted, and that is in great contrast to The Lover, where you have very short sentences. It's an excellent novel to teach to French students in French because it's, you take it by little segments, and her vocabulary is very approachable as well. But the effects of how the writing is approached, or of how these sentences are constructed, is different in each of these two cases. But in The Lover, although there's that simplicity, there's also kind of like an effective impact of what she is saying, like also in the interruptions, in the cadence, in the way of switching from one memory to the next without preparing you to turn to another character she's remembering from her youth, for example.
There's a lot here in what you've just said. I want to pick up on just a couple of things. So the first is, yes, she's returning to the same story that she's already written at least once before. I think actually in English, the translation of that book is the seawall rather than just the
The
wall.
seawall.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Hmm.
So she's returning in a different style, as you're suggesting. You're suggesting a distinction between the modern and the postmodern. And it's certainly a very fragmented text, and it sort of jumps around. It jumps from the present to the past and various intermediate moments. And maybe you want to say a little bit more about that. But I'm also interested in what you're saying about the fact that she's returning to writing after a period in which she's been working as a filmmaker or in a visual medium, because it strikes me that this book is also very visual in some ways. It gets turned into a movie itself not long afterwards, although it starts with the notion of, well, early on, you have this image, you have this scene in which the young woman meets the lover on the ferry, and she repeatedly says there's no image there. That you know that she has to, the writing has to perhaps fill in or try to fill in for what is not recorded as an image, as a visual image. So I don't know if you want to go either of those two ways, the fragmentary nature of the writing or the relation between image and writing in this particular book.
Yeah, yeah, those are great questions to discuss. I think the second one compels me most because the way in which I like to work on Duras's writing is precisely welcoming that challenge that she poses for herself to engage with what has no image, and in the same way with that which is not sayable. And that, like, those negativities are the material for writing, or the real yeah, the impulse in Duras for writing. And so it's good that you're mentioning that film that was made shortly after, because she was very much against this film precisely because she thought, no, you're representing something that's not representable, and you're turning that which, and this goes to the first question you were asking, that which is necessarily fragmentary and resists any kind of weaving into a full story, into just like a sexy story
Mhm.
about a young woman and seduction, and that's it. And that's that's not it per se for Duras, even if she is telling a very um, sensual and very erotic story about her life. But what she wants to always highlight is something that's between the lines, between the images, and between the also dialogues.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you began by saying you were teaching Dura, if not this book, in the context of a course on mysticism, in that, well, mysticism is partly about trying to gain access to the ineffable, to what cannot be represented,
Mhm.
but often the mode of access, or the procedure of mysticism, is very much about the body, right? A certain
Mhm.
physical, I don't know, constraints. So making yourself alone, and the religious mystic, for instance, in a cell, and accepting certain sort of physical mortifications or sacrifices as perhaps a mode of insight or access to what is beyond the body and what is beyond language. I don't know if you feel there's a mystical aspect here to this book, or would that be going too far?
That's great. Yeah, no, it's yeah, the mystics, yeah, are often very much into asceticism, but one way in which we could think about that inclination here, even though I don't know, I haven't thought about whether this would be a mystical writing or not. But but the point that could that they have in common is that she's focused on um, an experience that goes beyond limits and an experience that is very bodily and it goes beyond pleasure. So maybe in psychoanalysis, the work of Lacan really highlighted this word in French that is used commonly, jouissance. And she
Mhm.
is all about, like, the word jouissance appears in The Lover many times in the French version. And jouissance, I guess, and I haven't read The Lover, I've read L'Amant,
Yeah.
and I've read El Amante. That's where I started,
Wow.
actually. So, but I don't remember exactly what words were used in that one. But in L'Amant, there's jouissance. It could be something like pleasure, but it's a pleasure that's very intense, very extreme, and on the verge of pain. And the way in which she's describing it, it's also almost violent sometimes, or she even says, like, I was going every night. I was just looking at that, leafing through the novel today before we got together. Uh, I was preparing to meet this man every night and continue deepening my knowledge of God. That's what she calls
Hmm.
this affair that she's having with this man. So there is something there, whether or not you isolate yourself or you isolate yourself with someone. In this case, this is what the character is doing.
It's certainly not a conventional love story. In many ways, and I think one thing we need to get to is, of course, she's very aware, makes us aware of the different power dynamics that are at stake or at play here, of race as well as gender, colonizer and colonized. And of course, what perhaps the era of Me Too may jump out particularly is this age disparity. The protagonist of the book, and we might talk about the autofictional or the extent to which this is also a true story, but the protagonist of the book is is a adolescent, is 15 and a half, we're told, and the lover, the Chinese lover, is at least a decade older than her, I think 27, 28, or something like that. So, and what kind of relationship is this? Is this a relationship of exploitation? Is this an unequal relationship? What would you say about that?
Yeah, no, that when we think about it in the contemporary terms that we have most available to try to read um, relationships and um, sexual situations, it is like completely outside of the margins, of course. It's also probably something that has been very common for a long time in history in many places. So I would say that there are a number of power dynamics. So yes, there is the age difference, there's the class difference. This is a rich man, a rich Chinese man with a lot of material power,
Hmm.
engaging with an adolescent, as you're saying, who is in a very precarious situation with her mother and brothers. And this is also, and also she's a French woman in colonial Indochina at the time. Uh, and so there is also the racial difference and a racialization of the Chinese man that is in the novel. And so, yeah, like there are all of these complicated points there. So I think that what's interesting about Duras writing this in with these characteristics is that she is, as you said, telling a story that is closely linked to what she experienced as a young woman. So this is a writer who was born um, in this colony and who lived there until she was 18. So the lover tells the story of the final years of her time in Indochina um, before she takes a boat to France and and stays in Paris for from the rest of her life, basically. But so she is telling a story of something that happened to her. So it has that kind of dimension of an experience she couldn't talk about at the moment
Hmm.
and that she is later constructing into her writing. And she has always insisted on how that experience is what made her want to write
Hmm.
as well. She incorporates that into her versions of this story that she then knew she would be a writer. Um, but it's very interesting and different from how we write about these intimate experiences that are unspeakable and that have to do with a lot of structural power and oppression.
Hmm.
She does it in a way that still wants to open up a space for the us a desiring subject
Hmm.
living through these things. So she doesn't have the vocabulary that we have of the critical vocabulary for sexism, for misogyny, for racism, etc., in the same way. But she does want to resist only thinking about things as if we were just placed according to categories such as those. She was a feminist and she had great conversations with feminists in the 70s and later. But she, yeah, here she's just trying to get access or to trying to get access and transmit her access to something she lived through that without anybody being a victim or like the dominant party in a situation. It's kind of remarkable in that way, I think.
So I was going to ask you that it also relates to something we were talking about before we started recording. I guess bluntly, um, is she a victim, or is the lover a victim, or is perhaps the discourse or language of victimhood not helpful here? What would you say?
I would say she steps aside from the language of victimhood, and it's you could really see her as she tells a lot of stories, not only the story of how this man picked her up, basically, uh, but and in all of these stories, you can see that there were um, so, for example, the whole colonial situation was problematic. The reason she was in a very precarious position is that her parents were uh, kind of sold some land that was not usable in order to have rice crops. And because the Pacific Ocean was always washing, like getting this salty, nothing could grow there. And that, therefore they were just like stuck and they had nothing. And then so she's very aware. So Duras is also someone who was involved with the Communist Party, then rejected by the Communist Party, but like she had a political consciousness in on many levels, but as she marks these injustices and is aware of social justice and the injustice also of being a girl in a world that's very um, male oriented, she wants to show that there was a subject. I wish I could say Um, I would like to try to convey how that is present, but I think there's nothing like reading her own words on it. But yeah, so she steps aside from the victim narrative and all narrative in a way.
And yet she is feels compelled to tell this story or to tell the story again. Again, this is something we talked briefly about earlier. This is not the first time that she tells this story. Um, this is not the first attempt to put this into words. There is, I don't know, am I going too far? A compulsion to repeat? Would that be? I'm, sort of indicating as part of the narrative or the part of the vocabulary of psychoanalysis. Do you think
Mhm.
that's helpful as a way to understand what's going on here?
Yes, there is, I would say there is a compulsion to repeat. And that's not um, pathological. It's not a problem. It's not only, I wouldn't even, um, it's not something that she's repeating in order to resolve it
Hmm.
necessarily. It's just that each time it's a fresh repetition. So, so each time that she repeats, she is repeating around something that can't be represented. That's why that is repeated, as in a traumatic element, kind of guiding it and calling for it. But it's not in order for that to go away. Instead, it's to see what can be created around that gap in language and signification. So that's why each repetition can be so new. And she's even showing that it's a story that precedes her own individuality. So this isn't only like a self-centered, self-obsessed um, person who can't get over herself and over her own life. And no, instead, she really gets to the heart of something that can be shared and that is human. So a way to see that, or that I've been interested in seeing that before, is by noticing how she is also repeating the story of Bérénice that Jean Racine wrote, a tragedy. So it's the same, it's a tragedy that in the 17th century was telling the story of a Jewish queen from the destruction of the Second Temple, so from the Roman Empire. So she's showing how this is a trans-historical and like unending story and transcultural story as well.
I think that's a fantastic place to end with the notion that through this very individual, personal story, she's also getting at something human and something, as you suggest, trans-historical and transcultural. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time and for this fantastic and I think very productive conversation.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you.